what's going on, everybody? It's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 day, so I'm here to review Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I already reviewed the first movie. It's on my channel. I made a playlist if you want to go check that out. This review will be on that playlist as well. And also the review of the new Guardians movie that comes out will also be all on that playlist once I put both of those out. But before I get to my review, I do want to say if you're watching this, hit that like button if you enjoyed this video. Also leave a comment down below. What are your thoughts on the Guardians franchise and in the MCU as a whole, I suppose. Also, you can hit that subscribe button if this is your first time watching any of my videos, or if you're a returning viewer as well. I appreciate any support I get for this channel. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I will post content similar to this. But for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, I appreciate all the support, but let's go ahead and get into this review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. I hadn't seen this movie in a couple of years. I just watched the first one again recently, as I mentioned, a couple weeks ago, and that movie honestly blew me away more than it ever has. It honestly reframed my thinking on the Guardians in the MCU, and once this third movie, as it's coming out, how this trilogy is going to rank. Because for me, really, the Spider-Man trilogy, as far as the MCU goes, is up there for me, always been in the top 3 for me, as well as the Captain America trilogy, Winter Soldier, and Captain America Civil War. Even though the first movie wasn't quite the strongest, I think those two movies were so good. Arguably, those could both be in the top 5 of the MCU, in my opinion. And then, of course, the Spider-Man movies. I just love Spider-Man. He's my favorite superhero, so that is just naturally up there, and I think they just did a really good job. Far From Home being really the weakest in the trilogy, and I thought that was still a damn good movie. Gets forgot about a lot because it came out right after Endgame. I thought it's a little weird at the timing of them releasing that. But anyways, after watching the first Guardians, honestly, that is definitely in my top 5 of MCU movies now. I just love that movie, the way they brought it together, the first time introducing those characters, getting introduced to all these parts of the galaxy we hadn't seen yet in Marvel. The time it came out and really Marvel hitting its peak, the cast, the characters, so much joy and so much love for that first movie. So going into the second movie, I had always, kind of put it in the middle tier of my Marvel movies. After watching the first one, this is definitely a little bit of a step down, but honestly, that's not really a diss or anything. It's more of a compliment to the first one, how great it was. This movie is definitely good. There is definitely a little bit of an issue with the balance of the humor, really jokey movie right from the start with this. And I think there is a reason to kind of explain that. I think with the first movie, we're really getting introduced to all these characters for the first time, so there wasn't as much of the jokey nature to it at the beginning of that movie, whereas in this movie, our characters are already together. We start out with this whole, the first 20 minutes of this movie is them on this mission for the sovereign motherfuckers. The first 20 minutes of this is just really action-packed with a lot of humor thrown in here because, again, our characters are already accustomed to each other now. They're already bickering amongst each other, have their own things about them, and are very used to each other. So it made sense in that way, but I will say, especially the first half of this movie, a little bit too many jokes, even though I will say they mostly worked. So it wasn't as much of a detriment as it could have been, but I do say there was moments where I was like, okay, this joke is either going on way too long or it just didn't feel necessary in this moment. It did kind of kill the tone a little bit. But once the second half of this movie does kick into gear, you get into the majority of the second act, into the third act, I thought this movie did a lot better with the balance, a lot more like the first movie did, which I really did enjoy with that. Again, like I said, a lot of it is you were getting introduced to the characters at the beginning of the movie, so there wasn't as much of those jokes to go around. Whereas this, I think, again, there was a little bit of an adjustment now that our characters knew each other. A lot of jokes were getting off there, and I think that's probably one of my main criticisms with this movie is that tonal issue in the first half of this movie. The second half of this movie is definitely the strongest. I really did enjoy a lot of what they bring into this movie, the sovereign people. They weren't all that consequential in this movie, but everything with Yondu in this movie, and of course with Kurt Russell's character Ego, and Chris Pratt's character Star-Lord just dealing with the fact that his father was never around, and just all the directions he goes with that, I really did enjoy. This was definitely more of a personal story. In that way, I did enjoy the story on that level more in this. It might be the only thing I really did enjoy better, just because, as I said, I really did love that first Guardians movie. And then how it all wraps into Yondu, just the character turn he makes. Obviously, he does make a little bit of a turn at the end of the first movie, but in this movie, they just get way deeper into the reasons why Yondu, some of the other reasons why he kept Peter. Ego being, of course, a horrible being in the world, trying to take over the planet and make it all him, and really have that typical villain archetype in Kurt Russell's character Ego. He's not the best movie villain, I will say. I think actually, having watched these first two movies again recently, I think Ronan the Accuser is actually a better villain. I really did like him more than I did in the past watching that one again. So it was nice to have Kurt Russell in the Marvel Universe, and I could see him being Peter's dad. This movie is at its heart about family. I think that's why I really did appreciate the balance that this second half of this movie had, giving you these serious moments and really having a few moments where I was like, oh man, that is like a legit, like, deep emotional moment, whether it was some of the lines Rocket had near the end of this movie and the way they really set him up well going into the Guardians 3. Even though, looking back on it, this movie came out in 2017, we still had the Infinity War and Endgame and all that shit to go down. It's still, James Gunn did a good job of setting this up leading into his next, Guardians 3, which would be the end of this trilogy. The last shot of this is Rocket crying, having a tear, and you can tell there's still some shit that we don't know about him that's really affecting him emotionally, as funny as that may sound, Rocket the Raccoon. And you really deal with that at times throughout this movie. I like how they place it in throughout Rocket's just emotional baggage and how he can't necessarily, he has commitment issues with whoever he's around and doesn't quite think he's enough. How this ends with Yondu sacrificing himself, spoiler alert, I probably already know that by now if you're watching this. The way he sacrificed himself, the moment he had with Rocket, them working together, I thought that was such a cool pairing that I didn't even know that I wanted the first time watching this. I'm like, oh my god, that's perfect. And just Michael Rooker, man, just played Yondu so good in these two movies. For someone who has very limited knowledge in terms of the comics and the details of it, I thought he played the character really great. I wouldn't want anyone else to play that at this point. The way this movie ends with Star-Lord and Gamora finally accepting each other, maybe that they'll have an actual love, and of course how tragic that is watching this movie now and knowing what happened. This was a really nice sequel, Guardians 2. It was a nice bridge movie into the third one, and not necessarily saying that as a negative or anything. It was a good movie. It just wasn't as good as the first one, but again, just really high standards at that point with that. And one thing I also have to mention, the relationship between Gamora and Nebula, really strong here. I thought it was so fleshed out. I recognize it more than I did in any of my viewings before with this movie. That scene where they're fighting when Gamora, is on the planet with Ego. She just had her spat with Star-Lord, and she's just sitting in that beautiful field. So many beautiful shots in this movie. Just the directing is just off the charts with James Gunn in these Guardians movies. But you have Gamora just sitting there, and all of a sudden she sees the ship coming, and then immediately she's in this sister battle with her and Nebula, and you really see in this moment Nebula's coming to kill her, man. Like, she has death on her mind, and then just the fight that ensues, some of the visual spectacle of it, the last shot where they're just sitting there in that cave with the ship being on fire, it was just so much cool imagery. And then, of course, the conversation they have then really finally, Nebula just really just getting it off her chest, like she's had this resentment towards her because she felt like Gamora was always trying to get one over her, and then she had to pay for it with what Thanos did to her, punishing her every time. Such great work within the dialogue in the scene, and then just the emotional weight with that. And then even Star-Lord had some great moments near the end. Some of the conversations with him and Ego and his dad being like, why the fuck didn't you stick around? You said you love my mom. Why did you leave? And he has a couple really just strong, like really emotional weight behind some of these lines. And obviously just he's done great as Star-Lord in any movie he's been in the MCU. A really good addition to the MCU and to this what is going to be this Guardians trilogy now. My biggest criticism with this movie, some of the tonal issues, a lot being with the humor, especially in the first half, just some moments that go on a little too long with the jokey joke. But overall, I thought it still felt like a Guardians movie. It had that heart of the first one. But that is my main thoughts. I'm going to give Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 an 8 out of 10. Still a really solid, in that upper middle tier, maybe getting close to like the higher tier, honestly, if you think about it. But definitely in that upper middle tier level, I think, of Marvel movies, especially with some of the disappointments of Phase 4. It's definitely higher in the rankings than it probably even was before. But what do you guys think about this movie? What do you think about the Guardians movies as a whole? Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. As I said, leave a comment. And if it's your first time watching any of my videos, hit that subscribe button as well. Or if you're a returning viewer, any support for this channel is very much appreciated. You can also follow me on TikTok and add me on Snapchat, where I'll post content similar to this. But for the most part, my content will be here on this YouTube channel, Not Your Average Josh. So again, appreciate all the support. Be looking for my Guardians of the Galaxy 3 review very soon, and a bunch of other movies as well. That'll be it for now. I will talk to you guys later.